There's a specific kind of quiet that settles in around this stage of life, not the quiet of failure, not the quiet of collapse, the quiet of someone who has done everything correctly and still finds themselves wondering why it doesn't feel like enough anymore. You are competent, experienced, respected in most rooms you walk into. And yet, something has shifted, something subtle enough that you wouldn't say it out loud, but precise enough that you notice it every time you're passed over for a conversation, every time a younger voice gets the energy in the room, every time you catch yourself scrolling through someone else's trajectory and doing the math. This is not a confidence crisis. It is something more specific than that, and more interesting. Yet what most people don't realize is that confidence was never really about belief in yourself. That's the simplified version people sell. The more accurate description is this. Confidence for most of your adult life was a byproduct of visible upward movement, a new title, a raised number, a room where you mattered more than you did the year before. When the trajectory is visible, when the line is clearly going somewhere, confidence isn't something you have to manufacture. It comes with the movement. But here's what quietly changes after 40. The movement doesn't stop. The competence doesn't stop. The contribution doesn't stop. What stops is the visibility of the acceleration. And your brain, which learned early to read momentum as safety, starts interpreting the plateau as a problem. You didn't lose ability. You lost velocity. Yet that distinction matters more than most people realize. Think about the architecture of confidence when you were younger. There was always a next rung, a next benchmark, a next visible signal that you were expanding. Even if you weren't consciously chasing it, the presence of those markers created a kind of psychological forward pressure, a narrative that you were becoming something. That forward pressure is a form of confidence fuel, and most people don't know they're running on it until it slows. At a certain point in adulthood, the system shifts. You're no longer rising visibly. You're stabilizing, consolidating, managing complexity rather than unlocking new levels of it. And stabilization, structurally, does not produce the same internal signals that expansion does. This is not a personal failure. It is a phase transition. And the problem is that almost no one explains it that way. So instead of recognizing it as structural, you internalize it as personal, as evidence of something diminishing. There is also a second layer here, one that operates below the first. It has to do with where your confidence was directed. For most of your career, confidence was organized around impressing upward, making the case to someone above you, a manager, a board, a market, that you were worth more than your current position. That orientation produces a certain kind of energy, a certain kind of alertness. But after 40, that structure quietly stops fitting. You're no longer primarily proving yourself to people above you. You're operating among peers. Or you're the one other people are proving themselves to. Heck, and no one told you that this shift requires a different confidence framework entirely. Impressing upward is a performance model. It is outward, visible, and energized by external validation. Positioning laterally, or downward, is an influence model. It is quieter, slower to build, and powered by something internal. The discomfort you feel is not weakness. It is the gap between the framework you built and the phase you've entered. Here's what quietly becomes available after 40, and what most people are too preoccupied with the decline narrative to notice. Pattern recognition. By this point, you have watched cycles complete. You have seen good ideas fail because of timing. You have watched confident people move fast and land wrong. You have felt the weight of a decision made too quickly, and you have learned, not theoretically, but bodily, what restraint is worth. That is not the same as caution born from fear. That is discernment. Younger confidence moves fast and trusts momentum. It mistakes speed for direction. What you have is something different. You have the ability to see the pattern before others name it, to read the room before the room announces itself, to know which risks are worth taking because you have felt the cost of the other kind. You feel less confident because you no longer chase, but that restraint is not the absence of power. It is a more sophisticated expression of it. The problem is, restraint doesn't perform. It doesn't fill a room with noise. And for a long time, you've been reading quiet as retreat. Now, a complication. Because this would be a simpler conversation if confidence were the only variable. But you also have a mortgage, or children, or a reputation in a specific industry that you have spent decades building, or energy that does not recover the way it did at 32. These are not excuses. They are real constraints that make the standard reinvention narrative, the start over, take risks, burn it down version, not just impractical, but potentially harmful. Transformation at this stage cannot afford to destabilize what has been carefully constructed, and so you move more carefully, you weigh more, you calculate more. And then someone calls that hesitation fear. What they don't understand is that you are not afraid of change. You are protecting something worth protecting. The question is not whether to rebuild confidence. The question is how to do it in a way that preserves what took years to accumulate and still creates genuine forward movement. Here is what took time to fully articulate, and what most content about confidence conveniently avoids. Confidence after 40 does not look like confidence at 25. At 25, confidence is loud. It asserts. It moves into spaces and fills them. It bets on itself before it has full information, because it has the runway to recover from being wrong. That version of confidence is real, it is useful, and it is not yours anymore. Not because you lost it, but because you outgrew the conditions that required it. What replaces it, when you let it, is calibrated authority, not the performance of certainty, the reality of it. Calibrated authority doesn't need to prove itself in every room. It doesn't need to respond to every provocation. It doesn't need external confirmation to remain intact. It operates from a settled sense of what you have built, at what you have survived, and what you actually know. Not in theory, but through experience. This is where the reframe matters. You are not late. You are layered. The person who has done it, who has managed difficult people, navigated broken systems, delivered under pressure, stayed steady when steadiness was hard. That person does not need to perform confidence. They need to stop performing its absence. The shift isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen in a moment of revelation. It happens gradually as you begin to move from a framework of proving value to one of defining it. Proving value is outward-facing. It asks, do they see me? Defining value is inward-anchored. It says, here is what I bring. Here is what I will and will not do. Here is where I intend to operate. That second orientation is not arrogance. It is positioning. And positioning, done with composure, is how experience becomes influence rather than just history. This is what the phrase means when it comes back around. Authority compounds. Not loudly, not quickly, but with a kind of weight that loud confidence never quite achieves. You didn't lose your confidence. You lost the framework that was organizing it. And what's available now, when you stop trying to recover the old version, is a form of presence that took 40+ years to earn. Not louder, not faster, not more assertive, just more accurate, more aligned with what you actually know, what you have actually built, and what you are actually capable of. That is not a consolation prize. That is the compound interest on everything that came before.